Hello. I'm here. It's time for me to get into the files that I want to use. Let's do this. And let's add... Nope, not a scene. Let's add a source. Browser. Window capture. Okay. This page, but not so big. This will do. Okay, so now you should be able to see me. You should be able to see the window, and you should be able to see chat. That will do for now. How's it going? So conveniently, or perhaps distractingly, at about 20 till, the wizards at the coast dropped a video with one of the designers in Todd Kenrick, who does something at D&D Beyond or D&D in general. He used to do something else. He hosted Dragon Talks. So two D&D people were talking about the latest one D&D Unearthed Arcana, because they can't help but stack in company terminology. So Unearthed Arcana is playtest material. One D&D is the code name for the next edition of D&D that isn't a new edition. It just overwrites / supersedes the 2014 core rulebooks. So they're new core rulebooks for the same edition, because everything is supposed to be compatible. It's D&D as a service, as some people have talked about. Fortunately, some of the changes that they announced seem to be a result of them listening to people, which is good. I'll talk a little bit about some of those as people trickle in. Hi, D Yellowflower. Yeah, so you can watch the video on your own if you want, but things that I was amused and pleased by is going, oh, actually, you all said that giving somebody inspiration on a nat 20 isn't maybe the thing to do. Instead, we should give people inspiration if they roll a nat 1. Yes, because if you have success and then you give extra success for the success, you are creating a success spiral that does nothing to help people who are rolling poorly. If instead you give inspiration to someone who has just rolled the worst that they could possibly roll, it will increase the chances that the next time they roll better and don't feel like they are having a bad time because luck is just not with them today. If I were in that room, I might have said that to begin with, because I have read the game Dungeon World, where you get XP on a failure, so that that when you fail, you still get something you want. D&D has other problems with regards to a lack of failing forward and a lack of kind of the fiction always advances in a meaningful fashion that we may find in story games, which brings us to one of the pillars of today's chat, which may be the first in a series. I'm not sure. I'm also not totally sold on new dungeons, new dragons, new GM. I'm the same person, but I'm hoping to bring the lessons that I've learned from playing Forged in the Dark and Powered by the Apocalypse and other story games in the indie space almost exclusively over the last 5 years. Yes, randomized, especially for randomized failure. Because I played in probably a year and a half, possibly almost a 2-year 5e game run by a friend who is in my home group that is not broadcast. It's not recorded for anything. It's just friends hanging out playing games. And that's the longest chunk of time that I've played 5e. I have run a few one-off 5e things for friends and family, and I have listened to all of Adventure Zone Season 1, all of Not Another D&D Podcast Season 1 and Season 2, all of Season 3 of NADPod thus far, and a fair bit of the Adventure Zone graduation. So I've listened to, I would guess, several hundred hours of 5e actual play. Hey, good to see you, Queen's Court Games. Yeah, we're vibing. I was just talking about, like, here's how much 5e I've poured into my brain through actual plays, which is a lot. So I've engaged with 5e as a audience member a lot more by time than I have engaged with it as a player. But over the years, as I've been, watching and listening to actual plays, I have still been getting the 5e books and reading them and keeping up with some of what people talk about with regards to 5e in terms of various discourse, and here's this member of the staff that did some shitty things, and maybe they shouldn't work here anymore, and here's how this independent designer that WotC hired was not treated very well, and here's how this is maybe indicative of broader trends at Wizards of the Coast. So I've been up on that kind of stuff. What I have not done, however, is run a week in, week out 5e game at all. I've engaged with a lot of 5e. I read the Dungeon Master's Guide, big chunks of it some years ago. But what I haven't done is been an active 5e GM. And because I am looking at trying to supplement my writing income, at least for a while. Hey, Cafe Claire. Yeah, I think there's definitely something to be said in some actual play that they are focusing on what is entertaining to an audience, and that for a lot of people, the intricacies of the mechanics of 5e are not what is entertaining to the audience. And so that's an extra factor that I'm trying to be aware of as I re-engage with 5e in a more substantive fashion. Because if I'm going to be GMing 5e stuff on Start Playing Games, I'm still going to advertise myself as a largely story-focused GM and a largely improvisational, collaboratively focused GM, because that's the type of game that I run. That's my play style favors those elements. But it's a lot harder to improvise. Here is an on CR for this party challenge and a map so that with enough detail so that people can use their tactically oriented 5e powers in a way that is going to be at least nominally satisfying mechanically. Part of why I like a lot of these other games is that they're way easier to run in Theater of the Mind without needing to have a map all the time. D&D is still, after 40-something years and 5 or 9 editions, we're in 5e, but there's been other editions, and especially way more if you count OSR stuff, which is not technically D&D, but is kind of in that same tradition. In the way that D&D is a genre, OSR games are D&D, IMO. In the same way that castles and caverns, or any of those word and word that are the same first letter because they're trying to riff on Dungeons and Dragons. For me, all of those are D&D the genre. And basically all of those that I've ever engaged with enough that I can talk about them are still the descendants of Chainmail, the war game. Hey, lots of new people, so I'm just going to read chat real quick. Destructor 92,000. 5e's been pretty good overall. Yeah, subclasses. Not a fan of Arcane Archer Fighter. Okay. Yeah, a lot of the stuff that I see in the last few weeks, as I've been looking at this, start playing game stuff, and a couple weeks before that, I started playing in a West Marches style 5e game where I'm playing a monk, which, I've seen and heard people play monks. I agree with some of the people who have difficulties with the monk with regards to Orientalism, given that it is a kind of culturally specific version of a monk that is more apart from default D&D settings in a way that then again falls into like essentialist Orientalism. We're not talking like, this makes me think of the Gamers movie where one of the characters wants to be a monk and the GM is like, if you want to be a monk, you're going to be a monk Occidental. And they have the shaved pate. So like, I wanted to figure out like, okay, what's a version of a monk that I'm going to feel more comfortable playing? And what that was the subclass that is less magic and is just, you are good at fight. And so in my head, that character's class is like brawler or martial artist, where for a lot of, white Westerners in the US, someone says martial artist, they're going to think about the martial arts of East Asia, but like Savate is a martial art. British pugilism is a martial art. And so I could have like unarmed martial arts, like, oh, okay, somebody who studied late medieval German wrestling is a martial artist. And so, okay, that's my martial artist character that I'm going to feel more comfortable with. But when I'm coming back to 5e, if I'm going to be running 5e, I want to find a happy middle ground between what people go to 5e for and what I'm interested in running. Because I think there is an overlap. The thing I'm going to have to work my way through is how much of the nitty-gritty stuff that is really not in the story games that I've been playing for the last 5 or 6 years that is necessary for a big chunk of people who go to D&D because that's the game they know or it's the game that they want. Some of that's going to be about tactical combat. I feel I'm pretty good at cinematic combat because I have martial arts experience, and some of that martial arts experience was melee martial arts experience. So I have some of that like non-lethalized version of the experience of what it is to be in an area where 100 people are fighting all at once. And there are, there's an objective that is more complicated than just kill them all. Yeah, I think, did 5e earn its success, and what does earning your success mean? I think those are very reasonable and sometimes important questions to ask of D&D. D&D's massive success is partially built on the fact that it is owned by Hasbro, a giant multinational corporation. Part of its success is built on the fact that it was the first really popular one of these. Part of its success is built on decades worth of the oral tradition and the oral history of the tradition of TTRPGs passed down from game master to player to game master to player, where a lot of people were playing D&D. Part of it is built on the back of the success of the Lord of the Rings books and the kind of the resurgence in the 60s and 70s and Frodo Lives and that kind of stuff. Part of the success of 5e right now and D&D more broadly is built on the back of Stranger Things. It's built on the back of Critical Role. It's built on the back of Acquisitions Incorporated, the Penny Arcade thing. So there are a lot of factors. A question then to ask is, which of those factors are grant D&D the popularity that it has because of strong, evocative, effective, and appealing mechanical and fictional design done by D&D designers. One of the things that I hear people talk a lot about with D&D is that players of D&D, that's GMs and people who play PCs, do so much work to take the... Oh, thank you so much for the follow, Cafe Claire. Great to have you here. People take the material of D&D and put a lot of effort into it so that it then becomes functional. Part of that is going to be kind of inevitable in any TTRPG. No, you're very welcome here. Sometimes I play one-page RPGs, and I have to bring a lot to a one-page RPG because a one-page RPG does not explain a lot about what an RPG is. But the percentage of D&D 5e tables that are using some layered set of house rules to make sense out of things that were previously frustrations or confusions is, I think, so high as to be notable. And so we have D&D 5e, this thing that is a juggernaut of a Frankenstein's patchwork monster. It eats up so much of the oxygen in the room when people are talking about TTRPGs. In this last week, a notable, like a kind of a fairly major gaming oriented like fandom website, not fandom.net or fandom wiki, but a site ran a story that was like, here's how to play the Cyberpunk Edge Runners characters in D&D 5e. Edge Runners is based on Cyberpunk, the role-playing game from our Talsorian. Cyberpunk, the RPG by Mike Pondsmith, one of the most prominent and most like prolific Black American TTRPG designers. I think Pondsmith is American. Let me double check. I don't want to talk out of my ass. He is American. Great. And like Mike Pondsmith is still active and working in game design. And so like Cyberpunk, there's 2 versions of the Cyberpunk RPG right now that you can play as a TTRPG. And yet this site said to themselves, what we should do is we should stat up these characters in D&D 5e, because that's the thing you do, is you stat things in 5e because that's what people play. It is that overwhelming and omnipresent. A lot of people have a lot of fun playing D&D 5e. That's great for them. Because such a large percentage of the field is just people playing this one game a lot and in a bunch of different ways, there's a degree to which I, as a person who is a content creator in the TTRPG space, have to figure out whether I'm going to basically just ignore or give up all of that audience, try to engage, bring that audience over to other TTRPGs, or do I figure out how to operate in that space in a way that I'm happy to do? Whether that is bringing my aesthetic and my like creative and design agenda into the D&D 5e space, or whether it is to kind of meet that space on its own terms without necessarily reaffirming the things about it that I don't like. And so that's like the historical racism of D&D with regards to how like orcs and goblins and some of those species are described, because D&D still uses the term race for species that, for the most part, if we were, to my understanding, speaking as biologists, we would use the term species. Some of these species are cross-fertile in some ways, but doing that and talking about it in D&D can then also quickly get into weird places, like how in the first of the new 1 D&D Unearthed Arcana, they talk about like you can have multiple species ancestry, but you only get one of those species when you only get one of those races' racial traits, which, as I understand it, is like telling someone who's biracial, oh, okay, you get the specialness of being this race or that race. You don't get to be both. You can say that you're both, but mechanically the cultural, biological, magical inheritance that you receive from your ancestry, you only get one. Which has some pretty crappy implications, at least metaphorically, if not super literally. And there are a lot of people who are talking on that. I would recommend some of the latest episodes from the podcast 3 Black Halflings, and stuff that's coming out of the group that makes Asians Represent. Right. Like, so yeah, Cafe Claire kind of reframes the question about like not really being able to ignore the 5e audience. I think if I was fully committed to, I don't care about money, I don't care about reach, I just want to make the things that I'm excited about, and I'm happy with a proportionately tiny audience with regards to the overall TTRPG audience, I could ignore it. I have largely done that in the last few years. Speculate ran a 5e game that Greg did, that we went, I think, 2 or 3 sessions, but then since then we have not played 5e or Pathfinder on Speculate. We've played almost entirely Forge in the Dark games because that's what I'm into, and Brandon is into those as well. You know, when they ran Case of the Cindered Seal, and when I ran Rebel Crown, and now we have Girl by Moonlight, and we have Court of Blades. I do want to run things that are not Forged in the Dark for Speculate. You know, I want to play or run Alien. I want to play or run Thirsty Sword Lesbians. Something like Voidheart Symphony, or maybe Nova for like a one shot. There's lots, there's other stuff that I want to engage with. But I was talking with a fellow actual play creator who, if they're around, they're welcome to pipe in and identify themselves if they want, who was saying, like, you kind of have to be in that 5e space, which I took to be a question about like discovery and audience development, which I think is a very good argument. And I have taken that argument to heart, which is part of why we are here today. So if you can see this, this document that I have, this is some initial notes for what let's see, actually here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to add an image, and let me see if I can get the image that I want here. It should be in my downloads, because I think I like the image, and having it around maybe inspirational. Okay, so Blades of Sigil. I know that people say Sigil, but no, I'm not doing that. My friend Emily, for her games, reversed it so that people who were not from this city thought that they had to say it all cool style, and so they're like, yes, from Sigil. And then the people who are from Sigil are like, no, it's Sigil, like the word sigil. I am inclined to take that approach because Emily is smart. So I'm just going to put that down underneath me, because chat will scroll from the bottom here for a while, and I think that will be fine. But I'll keep an eye on it. So yeah, Planescape is a really cool setting. I was into it back in the day when, because I think Sigil is a shibboleth in this, like the material from this is a part of that box, the boxed set of Planescape. And folks who follow the channel actively will know that I started a run through of Planescape Torment last week and kind of ran out of steam about 2-ish hours in, partially because there was so much talking, and it's a lot on my throat. Not that this isn't, but this is taxing and engaging in a different way than that game is. So I haven't decided whether I'm going to go back and play it more on my own, whether I want to try it again for stream, whether I just want to watch somebody else's actual play. That's still TBD. But I like that setting, and I specifically like the city. I love a big city. I'm running Court of Blades. it's in a big city. It's got faction politics. And so an idea that I had, like kind of one of the first, okay, if I'm going to do 5e, what would I do ideas was, what if I ran a faction focused game in Sigil? And the idea there would be to take as much of Blades in the Dark as I can and bring it to 5e. So here's something. So one question, how much Blades in the Dark can I bring to 5e? And let's scroll down to there, and let's make everything bigger. Okay, so faction relationships, faction turn. How can I fix D&D by making it something else as a classic story told through the generations? Absolutely, Queen's Court Games. So in no way do I claim to be doing something that no one has ever done before, and finally I will fix D&D for the last time, and it will stay fixed. No, again, this is more, it's more, what's the D&D that I could get excited about? And what would my D&D look like? And being who I am, that's going to look like bringing things that I love from other games into 5e. It's funny because I've been watching, YouTube videos that are like, bring these 10 rules that you need to steal for your D&D game. And there's just so many people doing this thing. It's just it's all over. People are bringing escalation die in from 13th Age. People are bringing in flashbacks from Blades in the Dark. Part of D&D, an upside of D&D's incoherence and inconsistency is that it does accept other systems without blinking, especially if you do it right, because it is not as consistent and it is not as straightforward. You can collapse 5e down to ability checks, but D&D is so many more things than that, even in 5e. Here's the encumbrance rules. Here's how you do like social interaction stuff. Here's how exhaustion works. There's just a zillion systems that don't all use the same scales. It's not fractal design in the way that something like Forged in the Dark is closer to a fractal design, where you have a core shape, and then if you pull back, there are iterations and scaled up versions of that same shape, all connected to and building on or off of that core shape. So let's turn that mechanical incoherence into an upside. So we can have faction relationships. A YouTube creator, I think the GM layer. Let me double check. I've been watching a lot of his videos because he led a group call for Patreon a couple of, I guess it was just last week. So I've been watching his stuff and it's pretty good. Let me make sure that I'm credit. Yeah. So the DM layer, LAIR, which is created by Luke Hart. Watching those videos and being on that one call is all that I know Luke. So just clarification there. So Luke even has a video about like, here's how to do faction relationships in D&D. And it's not the same as Forged in the Dark. I get the idea of wanting to make it do better what it already does. For me, to enjoy 5e, I want to make space for it to do a better job of enjoying social interactions and kind of how group relationships operate. And so those are the things that I'm going to be bringing to the game. D&D being better at what it does be in combat for me is just 4th edition. Because 4th edition was very focused on being combat. A lot of the language of how combat and powers worked was streamlined in 4th edition. Oh, here's a once an encounter power. Here's a once a day power. Cool. A wizard throws a bolt of fire. It operates mechanically way more like a fighter shooting an arrow, because mechanically, if they're both doing damage and removing enemies from the board, why shouldn't mechanically they operate and be described in the same way? So I think for all that a lot of people recoiled from 4th edition, myself included, because it really didn't do the things that I wanted D&D to do, which was include more of that social stuff. 4th edition was a bit D&D being at its most D&D in a particular way. People are like, oh, it felt too much like a video game. Well, video games drew inspiration from D&D via things like Baldur's Gate, Knights of the Old Republic, and so on. So there's a degree to which 4th edition, drawing influence from massively multiplayer online RPGs, was just a progression of the same cycle. So I could, people can run 4th edition and it's still out there, and that's great. Yeah, so I think the thing, Cafe Claire, there is I have spent time with those other games doing those things, but when I do so, I am completely invisible to the 5e ecosystem. And so my approach to how do I deal with the 5e ecosystem is to try to make some of that space that I'm happy to operate in. Because that is more likely, I think that is a far easier task than it is to actually carve out some of that market share and bring it back to the space of independent TTRPGs. I think it'll be easier for me to do that step, having already made a name and connections in the D&D space. Going, oh, okay, here's 5e games that Mike has run for Start Playing Games or on stream or whatever, and I really like the way that Mike thinks about things. And Mike has talked about, this and this and that coming from this other game, and so maybe that'll be interesting. The idea that I might be able to be part of a group of designers who are operating in the 5e D&D space while trying to be clear and create an on-ramp for people to move from the 5e space into the kind of story games, indie TTRPG space. That is appealing to me, and that helps me feel like the effort to figure out how to operate in the 5e space can be more worth it, in addition to like the financial and platform considerations, where there are a lot more people with eyes on 5e stuff. Yeah, and to your latest point, Cafe Claire, that point, your point is really, really good, because it underscores the fact that everybody is making that choice for themselves, and that I am choosing to operate to wrestle with a system, but people don't have to wrestle with a system unless that wrestling is in service of some other agenda, whether that is you're the only person in your home gaming group that wants to play other games, and so you play D&D with a group of people who want to play D&D, and you wrestle with it, either bringing stuff to it or just trying to take what it is as itself and point it in the directions that you want. I think GMs or a lot of the notable, like the most famous actual play GMs who are playing 5e are manipulating that game toward their own aesthetic agendas and their group's aesthetic agendas. Somebody like Brian Murphy, who's the GM for Not Another D&D podcast, is constantly homebrewing, because homebrew allows him to make systems that create framing and kind of basically an improv prompt mechanically and fictionally for this troupe of kind of improv comedians, which are his players in this group. And so that, one of the almost numberless reasons why you homebrew is to do something that serves your table. Okay, so back to this. How much Blades in the Dark? Faction turn. I wonder if I can bring downtime. How could I effectively bring downtime actions into 5e? I am pretty sure that there are already some downtime rules in 5e. I could not tell you what they are. They are probably in this book right here. But this book is very big. Now, yes, you might say 3/4 of that book is magic items. So it may be easier to find the downtime system. But you know what I like? Clocks. Clocks are good. Clocks are good because I can put a clock on a table. Clocks can very simply visually represent progress, danger, imminence, pacing, and all of that kind of stuff. And the Blades in the Dark or Forge in the Dark downtime systems are really nicely intertwined with the clocks systems. I talk about Forge in the Dark games as having clockwork gears that interconnect, where if you move one of these gears, it tends to interconnect and move the other gears, and it creates a gameplay and fictional flywheel where your characters go on a mission. On that mission, they do stuff to a faction and impact faction relationships. They might get stuff that they then sell for money, which impacts their money situation. In doing so, they will gain heat, which impacts another situation, and they gain rep. So as we add or move the different gears of heat and rep and coin and faction relationships, they're all designed to be interconnected, where, okay, you got this much coin from group A because you went and did a job against their opponent, group B. Your faction relationship for both A and B changes. Another representation of that change is that you impacted group B and you got money from group A. In doing so, you also gained heat, which may change your effective faction relationship with the cops over here. And so all of these things are interconnected. You know, you need rep and coin to gain tier. Tier impacts your effect, how challenging it is and how effective it is when you engage with another group, which then changes basically how much force you have to put in to move this gear over here. So changing tier changes kind of the rate at which, or the force required to move the gears. Caveclaire, I feel like in addition to asking, can I, which is probably yes, we'll need to be asking how much work will it be and how much impact will it have? Yeah, for sure. My hope will be that rather than doing the level of work that is required to publish a game supplement, I do enough work that I can be consistent to myself when I'm running games. I think that's the level that I'm going to look for, as long as then the impact is large enough that I feel like it's worth it. That being, I feel like it enables the type of storytelling that I want to be able to do in collaboration with players. If it's for games that I'm running professionally, that the impact that I want is it helps me stand out as a GM that people want to play with, and therefore that side hustle, that side job of being a professional GM on this site or on something like Demiplane or Roll20 or whatever is worth the time that I put into it. Because one thing that I can do is if I run a Blades of Sigil game and I have kind of my rough version of here's all the stuff I'm bringing from Blades, I can develop it in practice. And I run Blades of Sigil and I have a campaign and it goes maybe 15 sessions and then kind of peters out because campaigns often do that. I could start a new iteration of Blades of Sigil, run on Start Play Games, and then I get another chance and I can continue to iterate. This also applies to if I'm going to use something like this for a game on Speculate or running a 5e game for some other group as like a guest GM. In that I would iterate kind of live and in play. There is some risk in taking material like this and iterating it and honing it in public. But here's the thing. I've already been doing that with my overall GM skills and my inclinations and various materials in GMing for Speculate and in charity games for something like Bag of Giving, or in one-shots where I'm a player like for world builders. I am already a being who improvises and iterates in the moment. So that makes it easier. So I'm going to put clocks on its own because of clocks. Could I do rep, coin, tier in 5e as well? Probably. Do I want to? I don't know that I do. That may be more abstraction or translation into a parallel system than I'm really looking for. I do have some opportunity because there is no official 5e material for Planescape at this point. There's a win condition of this where I run Blades of Sigil or, bring Blades material into 5e for Planescape over the course of this next year. And then by the time the Planescape book comes out and theoretically DM's Guild opens to Planescape materials, I have a bunch of stuff that I could publish. Now, would I specifically publish Blades in the Dark things? Not before taking a long look at how the SRD works, and potentially not without having a conversation with John Harper. Could I publish that scenario with adapted material that is inspired by but is mechanically distinct from material in Blades in the Dark? Absolutely. Other systems have done stuff with clocks. The specific version of clocks that's in Blades in the Dark is one of many implementations of this stuff. So we're going to go back up. So you may be able to see that I got a new chair. I am more like a pro gamer now because I have a secret lab chair. I'm still getting used to leaning back and using this headrest thing because I'm not used to it. I'm used to a chair that only goes up to about here. So I'm probably going to be working on like adjusting the lumbar thing and moving the seat around, because like, oh, now it's up farther and I can lean back on it more, but I have all this hair which I don't like feeling on the back of my neck especially, and if I put it up in like one of these hair ties, then that hair tie is just kind of smushing against my head and my neck on that pillow. So there is still some work TBD. I need to learn things like easy hair buns, or maybe get some different hair things that will let me do any of that kind of stuff. So looking back to here, Planescape. As of this, there are 15 factions in Sigil, and there's only allowed to be 15 factions. In the expansion/supplements that came out, there was the big faction war, and as I understand it, not having read that book, the end result is no more factions. But I want factions. And so my options are I can go back to the status quo as of this book, and I can use the 15 factions that already have full write-ups. The thing that I am inclined to do is to instead say that faction war happened and move the timeline forward beyond it. Because that way, some of the factions that I want to keep, I can say that they reformed, and then I can create new factions. Ideally, what this lets me do is use some existing material that legally I'm allowed to use on something like, Roll20 or Fantasy Grounds or whatever, and then could publish if there's new DM's Guild permissions for the Planescape setting, because the stuff that I would publish for Planescape is not canon. And so I don't have to worry about dealing with canon. If I can fit something into the 5e status quo canon that they set, maybe that makes whatever potential future supplement more saleable. I'm not as worried about that, really. So one of the things that I was working on was trying to meet the factions kind of on their own terms. So I said, okay, of the factions, which is the faction that I have ideas for how to do something with them? And I landed on the Athar, who are kind of anti-theists. Specifically, they believe that the gods exist, but do not believe that the gods are specifically worth worshipping. Yes, they may be very powerful, but they don't deserve the worship that they get. And so one of the bits that I have here is, what if atheists ran the Unitarian Universalist Church? There is still some idea of a greater truth beyond, but they focus on mortal self-reliance. They try to undermine divine influence. So they have kind of this long-term project of what does it mean to part the veil, especially in a place like Sigil, where it's connected to all these different realms and like all that kind of stuff. The plane hopping part of Planescape is less interesting to me than the big, messy world city torus that is Sigil. So if I was going to run a game there, I would probably include some stuff where people went to one or another of these different planes, but I wouldn't want to do a grand tour of the planes kind of campaign. And I probably wouldn't even want to do like, yes, here's the 12 session arc where people are in Mechanus. It would probably be more like, here's a 3 session arc where you're in Mechanus because something happened that you came to understand would require you to go to Mechanus to do what you want to do, and that all of that can be traced back 15 sessions to when you kind of ran roughshod over a Modron construction project while you were screwing with some other faction. And then this kind of whatever the beings from Mechanus do is pushback or kind of an entanglement from stuff that this group has already done. So where I landed was, okay, if I can make my own factions, I can set it hundreds of years after the faction war. Factions are back, but use the factions I want, discard the rest, and make some new ones. Factions try to keep the bloodshed to a minimum because more open bloodshed draws the ire of the Lady of Pain and the Dabus, or Dabu. I think it's Dabus, possibly Dabuses, which are these kind of hands of the Lady of Pain. The Lady of Pain is this divine or semi-divine giant lady. The head on Planescape is the head of the Lady of Pain, and she is in charge of Sigil. If you muck with things too much, she puts you into a pocket dimension that's a giant maze. You probably don't get to escape from the maze. Can you escape from a maze is a great high stakes adventure for a group in Planescape. You do something, it draws the ire of the Lady of Pain, it's a misunderstanding, boom, you got mazed. You know you're innocent, or maybe you even aren't innocent, but you have your own reasons to have done the thing that you did, and so now you're trying to get out of the maze. And the only other people that are in the maze are other people that have gotten mazed, or maybe you're in your own private maze and there's a bunch of like divine construct, the kind of lady-made constructs that are there to screw with you, and you have your like own personalized torture labyrinth or something. Well, that might be interesting. The party getting thrown into a maze seems like a thing to keep in my quiver to throw at the party at some point if I'm going to run a game like this. So this is more specific adventure stuff. So in all of this YouTube viewing that I've been doing, I'm just going to scroll down and make sure that, okay, in all of this, is this too loud? No. All right. I only got this mic about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago. And so I'm still feeling it out. It's a direct address mic, so it needs to be like really close to my face here. Like there's only this much space between my face and this mic. But what it does is, because it's a direct address mic, it does not pick up, say, the fan or the fan over there or the heater / the AC over there or the computer being pretty loud. The audio has been consistently good. Great. Volume seems fine to me. Great. Thank you, Cafe Claire and Trivity Mats. That is very encouraging and a big relief, because I was grumpy that my audio was not always good. And I'm glad that I found something that seems to have done the trick. So I watched a bunch of YouTube videos. I watched stuff from Sly Flourish. I watched stuff from DM Lair. I watched stuff from Dungeon Master, like the guy who's Baron de Rop, like Dungeon Masterpiece Theater or something, effectively, and then a few other D&D creators. I went back and rewatched some Matt Colville stuff. The algorithm just tends to surface men in the D&D space, and I know that there are people that are not men in the D&D space. They just don't get surfaced by the algorithm so much on YouTube. Basically, I see stuff from Ginny D. I see occasionally stuff from Dale Kingsmith. That's about it. I know there's more folks out there. I follow Mendari on Twitch, who is a D&D homebrew streamer. And then there's a bunch more people out there. So if you're thinking like, Mike, this list that you gave is basically dudes. And I'm like, yeah, it basically is. And that's rough. But one of the things that I got in all of this searching and watching stuff is like, okay, here's an adventure template from this person. Here's like a campaign write-up template from this other person. So I'm going to go to my downloads and I'm going to pull this campaign template from this other person. If I can remember where it is. I'm just going to open Adobe and go to my recent and see if that will actually open. No, I don't know that it is. Did not show up in my recent. I must have been looking at it in my browser version of. All right, so I'm going to talk while I go back to. I'm going to go back through my YouTube history real quick and find the thing that I'm looking for. It'd be fun if I could go into my history and then filter by, can I filter by channel? No, I don't think I can. So I'm looking for a basically 1-page / 2-page campaign All right. Campaign guide from one of these creators. Great. So I've found it. And I'm going to pull this over to look at. So the thing that's useful here is that this is one page, like a 2-column page, that gives an overview of a campaign. It establishes kind of major important truths of the setting. It gives guidelines for character creation, and it talks about like content and safety tools. This is really cool. I like a lot about this. This is another thing from Sly Flourish, aka Mike Shea, who's the author of the Lazy DM's Guide, and the Return of the Lazy DM. So that PDF is in there. I think if you are a patron of him, you can get the Word doc version or whatever. And a lot of these folks that I've been watching and engaging with, they've got Patreons. They do merch. They're writing their own 5e modules, and like, oh yeah, okay, make YouTube videos about TTRPGs, specifically D&D, get popular, start a Patreon so that people can support you for doing the thing that you're already doing, do more of it, and then turn some of the stuff that you do into modules / things that you can sell on DM's Guild. Like, that's a whole ecosystem. And maybe you do other stuff that doesn't need to be on DM's Guild, but it's still using the 5e OGL, and therefore you can sell more widely. And you do Kickstarters and all that kind of stuff. So overall campaign write-up. I'm going to go to my Start Playing Games page because I started making... nope, I don't want to do that. I'm going to move this over here because I don't want you to see me doing my login. Don't mind me. I'm just going to do this over here. So I'm going to scroll up, and then I'm going to go... and I'm going to log in here. Hey. Here's my login. So in the, when you're kind of setting up on Start Playing Games, you build templates, and you can then use those templates and turn them into game listings. So here is the short write-up that I came up with for Blades of Sigil, which is going to be kind of the equivalent of this top thing in the one sheet that I linked from Mike Shea. So, standing at the nexus between countless worlds, Sigil, the City of Doors, is also known as the City of Secrets. 15 factions vie for control of the city while trying to keep their struggles from spilling over into open warfare. Play a group unified by ambition as they navigate a complicated web of faction relationships in the wildly inventive city at the core of the Planescape setting. This roleplay and cinematic combat-focused custom 5e campaign uses a robust faction system drawn from award-winning RPG Blades in the Dark to generate exciting plots, beloved allies, and unforgettable rivals. So this is like the start of my write-up. I'm probably going to want to revisit this because effectively the meta on Start Playing Games, like the best practices as seen by the GMs/DMs who are the most active and the commanding the best rates at with good responses, is an emoji game where you have 3 to 5 to 7 emoji in your write-up, and then each emoji is in a line, and then you have a short bit of text that corresponds with the emoji to be able to be really fast and quick, bite-size intelligibility. This is riffing on what people are doing in TikTok, more and more and more smaller atomic bits of content. Do I necessarily need to do that? No. Would it maybe help? Probably. And I'm always down for a writing exercise that prompts me to be more efficient in my writing. So so take daring action against rival factions. Navigate a complicated web of relationships. Make your mark on Sigil. Help friends screw over enemies. Live to thief another day. Something like this. If I'm thinking like, okay, you are a scoundrelly adventuring party that is part of one of these larger factions, so that then keeps a lot of the vibe of something like Blaze in the Dark. Another reference here is, of course, Court of Blades, because in Court of Blades you are a group that is serving a large faction that is part of an overarching faction war in the Esaltari, and Court of Blades as written by a couple of Drakes. Live to thief another thief. I don't know about that. Live to fight another day, maybe. Like, suggest that you're not always going to want to throw down every time. Because one of the things that I think can be silly about D&D is that the idea of every fight being a fight to the death. And there's material in actual D&D stuff and from other creators that talks about, like, it's silly that people have every fight be a fight to the death. So this is, again, not new, but is part of one of the many things that I would want to be a part of to my D&D. So I think the emoji here is running left person, like a person running away from the text. This is like broken heart, maybe. Make your mark on Sigil. This is like bullseye arrow. Navigate. This is going to be a spider web. And this would be like jumping person. Or masked person, right? And so then I just go to a big emoji list and I scroll through and I pull the emoji that I want. But if I'm doing this, if I have this as my write-up, I still probably want some in paragraph material to go before it. And then that'll go into my write-up. But sorry, I'm just jumping all over the place because I'm in the stage of this development process where I am taking in a bunch of things. I am jumping between ideas. I am thinking about what I want from all of this. And so you're not getting the most orderly version of this, partially because that's not how my process works. And I don't think that it necessarily needs to be the most orderly thing, because the hope here is that I will, read some of these. I'm going to watch some more stuff. I'm going to reread some bits in the Dungeon Master's Guide. I'm going to read some of like Eberron Rising from the Last War, and I'm going to put together some of these things, because on Start Playing Games, it seems like campaigns are more popular than one-shots. I'm glad the stream of consciousness is interesting. That process, I really get a lot out of seeing other people's process in a lot of these situations, unless I'm going to a video for one very specific thing, and then the person is kind of meandery. Because then my expectations and what the person is doing process-wise aren't lined up. And that's fine, because I was just going to that video for the wrong thing. This is definitely a process video. So the other thing that I can do is I'm just going to make a new document, and we're going to go over here, and this is going to be the Mournguard So this is an idea for an Eberron campaign that I had that is inspired in no small part by, let me go back over here and pull this. Great. So that this is back on text. And let's get a lot bigger here, just so that this is easier to read. So a little bit there. So we have Sire. The nation of Sire is was one of the nations in the last war in the Eberron setting, and Sire is the nation that got kaboomed by the Mourning. The Mourning is like this nuclear bomb, cataclysmic event type of thing that scared the surviving nations in the last war into signing an uneasy peace and moving into the status quo circa Eberron Rising from the Last War, the 5e Eberron book, where the status quo is Cold War. And so you get a lot of that like noir vibe that's in Eberron, while then also having space for the other things. My idea for an Eberron campaign here is less about the noir part and more about the Mournland and the ideas that can be drawn from the Mournland in doing a thing that I like in speculative fiction, which is literalizing the metaphor. So one of the interpretations of what happened to create the Mourning was that there was so much powerful battle magic that it just kind of went kaboom. What if instead, and this is a big spoiler for this idea, so if you are a potential player of mine in a Mournguard game months or years from now, this is where you should stop watching. This may or may not be relevant. It's fine. The Mourning is alive. The Mourning is the accreted consciousness of a century of war dead and destruction. When you have a war, a lot of innocent people die. When you have a war and you conscript people, a lot of young people have their whole life snatched away from them because they are thrown into the grinding, merciless horribleness that is warfare. Someone who, has never been to another country, doesn't necessarily have much or any of a political consciousness, is coerced into doing fatal violence under threat of other fatal violence to people they've never met and probably have more in common with than they do their superior officers. That's what war is like when wars are fought for conquest or empire. War is not much better for people serving a faction that is fighting war for theoretically more idealistic reasons. 18-year-olds in the USA were still conscripted in World War II and in the Vietnam War, and it was as shitty for a lot of them in both of those eras, even if many more historians look back on World War II and say that what the U.S. did was necessary for fighting, the global spread of fascism, versus people looking at the Vietnam War and going, well, that's the U.S. being shitheads. This is one part of a large campaign of dishonor across the middle and late 20th century conducted by the USA in their various imperialistic and colonialist efforts, often to make oblique moves in the Cold War against the USSR. And hello to everyone that doesn't already know my politics. I'm a raging lefty. and not a fan of war. So yeah, the Mourning is the antagonist of this campaign, but they are not the villain, because the Mourning is reacting to what has happened. The Mourning is the pushback from the world against the forces that have fed these thousands or millions of lives into a thresher in pursuit of national, political, and or religious ambition. And so that's the big hook, is that there is a consciousness in the Mourning, in the Mournlands, which is the Mourning itself. And the Mourning event was basically that consciousness getting so overwhelmed. I think if you go to the Beltway in the USA and you talk to a lot of commentariat and lobbyists, they are big fans of war. Lockheed Martin's sales and marketing staff are probably fans of war. Blackwater sales execs are fans of war. War as a means to the end of riches and power. So we have the Mourning. The Mourning is conscious. The Mourning got overwhelmed by like a relative maximum fever pitch of simultaneous suffering at the kind of the last apex of the war, and kind of cried out in rage and sorrow. And that is what broke Sire in my campaign. And so where do we start? Where do level 1 PCs come into play, right? Level 1, maybe they're level 3. So start as border guards. So there's the Mourning. I have read big chunks of the Eberron book. If I am violating the canon as written in this book, you're welcome to tell me, but I may ignore it. Or I may go, okay, I'm not following that canon, and that's fine. For folks that are here that know the Eberron setting, I'm very happy to get your thoughts on how this does or doesn't fit your knowledge and your feelings about Eberron. So I welcome those comments, but know ahead of time that they are welcome, but I will not necessarily conform to the canon. So if we start the group as border guards, they are on probably the western border of the Mournlands in whatever that nation is. I don't know the map of Eberron very well. So I'm going to go find an Eberron map for myself. As we look at Corvair. So that's what, Thrain? Are we be looking at southeastern Thrain? I don't know where Zalargo and Dargoon end and where Thrain begins here, because I'm not sure that those brown lines that I'm seeing, whether those are trade lines or lines demarking the edge of a state. So let's say in southeastern Thrain, or maybe northeastern Dargoon. The details on that I can figure out later. Your job is defense. So this is basically me drawing from the Legend of the Five Rings lore of the Crab Clan. So in Legend of the Five Rings, which is a East Asian informed epic fantasy, largely drawing on iconography and history of Japan, but smooshed together in a big melange with Chinese, Korean, and some like Polynesian and North Asian stuff. It's mostly samurai, but there's a whole mishmash. And the analog to the Great Wall of China is this wall that the Crab Clan maintain that holds back the Shadowlands, which is the monster lands, which is basically the same kind of thing. And so is there a big wall at the edge of the Mournland? Maybe. It's only been a few years since the last war, right? Maybe they are still building the wall. And so there are sentries that live and work near the entrance to the Mournland and protect outlying villages, towns, from whatever comes out of the Mourning. So that establishes who are these people, where do they start? For this campaign, you all, wherever you came from, you have come to this part of this country and you are doing this work in this location. That lets me get all of them together. They are probably then going to have, establish character bonds. How well do these people know one another? Have they served together long? Do they trust each other? So this is like Apocalypse World-ish kind of design questions that I can bring to the table for session 0 to have in mind. The way that I use that kind of ask questions and follow through on the answers from Apocalypse World, Dungeon World, other PBTA games and things like that is actually pretty informal. Rather than listing out those questions as I have seen some GMs do in their ongoing campaign prep for something like Apocalypse World, sometimes the questions come to me in process, like just as I'm playing, and sometimes the questions are things that I think up ahead of time. But these are the kinds of questions that I would bring to the table effectively. So Adventure 1, a scouting party into the Mournland has gone missing. This is the idea that whatever group that they serve occasionally sends scouting parties out into the Mournland. And then you as the guards are the only ones who are close enough to go in after them. Like they receive a sending or a message. The party receives, let's do the PCs because we have a scouting party over here, right? Message, sending, messenger, bird, that they are the only ones close enough to go and rescue/find the scouting party. Their goal, bring the scouts back, and mostly bring back whatever they found. Because obviously, maybe I don't give the bring back whatever they found as obviously to everybody. Maybe I give it secretly to one PC, depending on the game and how much these characters do, how much the players do and don't want to have their own thing going on. But the bit there is that this scouting party found something. They were sent into the Mournland to get something, and then something bad happened to them after they've gotten it. Something chasing them, some cost of getting the thing, because there's a whole kingdom in Sire that was abandoned when the Mourning happened. So that's a lot of places for there to be magic items and old family relics and stuff. And so there's a grave robbing / salvage aspect to engaging with the Mournland. This means PCs into weird post-apocalypse fantasy from the beginning. This is going to be really important in the sales material, like the ad copy for this game, is this, like, at least the beginning, and I'd say probably the first half of the campaign, if it's a campaign that runs to like level 10 or 12 or something, like higher, like not 15 and above. I don't know that I'd want to do something that goes all that way, but a lot of the beginning portions of this campaign are going to be about dealing with the Mournland, coming in and out of the Mournland, going on various missions to places within the Mournland, kind of escalating duties of this border guard type of situation. And then as they grow in status and power, they're going to be given more and more dangerous, more and more important tasks. You go into the Mournland and fight a bunch of mutated rats is different qualitatively and tonally than 4 goblins attack the caravan that you're protecting, because I'm going to be drawing more on kind of some of the horror vibes that you can have in D&D, but not the kind of horror in something like Curse of Strahd, more like action horror. So more aliens than Event Horizon or Nightmare on Elm Street or Dracula. Scary monsters, scary situations, but these are things that you can face. You have one another, you have martial capabilities, you have a job. You need to get through the scary place to do the thing that you've been told to do, because that's why you're here. That action horror space is really the part of horror that I most vibe with. Meg, my wife, is a big horror fan, and so in the years that I've known her, I've now watched and engaged a lot more with horror than I did before we met. I've watched a fair number of those things. There's some that I like, there's some that I really don't like. If I were going to point to like 2 subgenres of horror that I like, it would be action horror and zombies. Zombie horror I like because, for me, I most like the chunk of zombie horror where the zombies are used as part of a larger narrative thematic move, where zombies are weather or zombies are metaphorical, something like Dawn of the Dead, the original, and then to a certain extent the remake, where they're saying stuff about consumerism and consumption. The original Night of the Living Dead, that's saying stuff about race and how race and threat and otherness is constructed. So that gets to the sociological level, which I appreciate. Action horror, I think I appreciate more from the perspective of action storytelling, because in action horror you get, here is an unknowable, almost incomprehensible threat, but I have a machine gun and I care about something. And so I'm going to do my best to use my machine gun / flamethrower / power loader to fight off this impossible thing. The assertion that the terrifying thing that threatens to destroy you and everyone that you care about can be fought, and you're going to fight it. That I connect with. I think both Alien and Aliens are incredible movies, but they're very different. Alien is more about survival. The kind of critique of capitalism is deployed differently. It's more about it. Alien is space truckers. Aliens is about how soldiers are rendered as disposable fodder in pursuit of corporate interests. they're connected but overlapping rather than identical critiques of capitalism. And because I think in this game, in this campaign, I would have, okay, so the group goes into the Mournland, they do this thing, they're kind of coming back and forth as they're learning more about how the Mourning operates. I think I would give them clues that there is some intelligence in the Mournland. Maybe, give the PCs some stuff that would lead them to believe like, oh, there's like a zombie lord or a necromancer here, or maybe the Mourning was caused by somebody from one of these nations, and they've used this as an excuse to, like, now they're looting all of what is left over. Give them the suspicion that there is okay, so there's, get to the point where they believe there is an intelligence operating in the Mournland. And then they're going to go to warn people. We were there. There was, here's this, giant army of something, or we saw, an undead flight of dragons, or, we saw a party of mind flayers who've come through a dimensional rift that's constantly screaming, some horror, weird fantasy, new weird kinds of vibes. And then they go back to people who live probably far away from the Mournland, and they go, yo, this shit is fucked up. There's bad things here, and you need to do something about it because, there's X many thousands or hundreds of thousands of people in all of these towns and outlying cities just between where we are in the capital of insert name of nation, Thrain or Dargoon, and where the Mourning is. And the Mourning has nations on all of those sides. And if the Mourning expands, or if it does something that, like, if it starts spitting big armies out, it's not just going to impact you, it's going to impact other nations. And they, not having been informed of what's going on, like I'm informing you, like we, the PCs, are informing you, they may take it as a declaration of war by us. And now suddenly we're at war again. And that's bad, because the last time there was a war, we had a Mournland. And this is even before the PCs come to understand how the Mournland operates, what the Mournland is. If the nations respond with more deadly force, the Mournland grows. You cannot end suffering by throwing more suffering at it. You cannot go, here is a living testament to our failure and our greed and our ambition. Let's throw more bodies at it. That does not reduce grief. All it will do is increase it. And so some nation sends a war party into the Mournland to, like, throw a nuke, basically throw a magic nuke on the portal or something. Somebody does something that is an escalation that brings more pain and war and death to the Mournland, and the Mournland grows. So early in this process, potentially at the beginning, the kind of large-scale inciting incident is some tipping point has been reached, and the Mournland will continue to grow until the central sin of the last war is addressed. So the Mournland, this consumption, this gasping return of the repressed, of the collective aggregate rage and kind of lost opportunity and spoiled, thrown away life that makes up the Mourning, will just keep consuming more and more of this world. And so then ultimately, what the PCs can do to be the big heroes is to confront that guilt. And this, for me, is a way that I can turn a game that is mostly about killing things into something that interests me. Because I can challenge on a fundamental level that worldview that is implicit, if not explicit, in the game of D&D, that this is a world where you solve problems by murder. I can take the small scale, party scale, solve things by killing them system and paradigm that is built into D&D. I can put a large scale mirror in front of the players where whole societies have chosen violence and conquest as the tools for interacting with one another, and this is what it has come to. Ultimately, what I would love for this to mean is that the big final encounter is not, can we beat a big Mournland monster? It's, can we convince the Mournland that the world has changed? Can we show the Mournland that the people responsible for the war have changed their mind or have been brought to justice or are not here anymore? And so the Mourning is now punishing just the people who were left behind, and it's just lashing out aimlessly. And either it is impossible to, it's impossible geographically or just entirely to get revenge on or get restitution and justice from the people who are most at fault for this mass suffering of the war. Because since it's fantasy, you bet that some of the people who started the last war are still alive because they are dwarves or elves or other long-lived species, and or they are liches and or otherwise immortal. And some of those people who with a pen and ink, or with the gesture of a hand and a few words, or with an act of will, sent what becomes countless numbers of people to die. Some of those people are still around. And so you might get a confrontation with the Mourning, where the Mourning kind of articulates their reality, their nature of like, this is why I exist and this is why things are happening the way that they're happening. And then what the PCs are going to could go do, and of course they still get to make these choices, right, is do the PCs try to go, okay, well, I see what you're saying, but we're going to kill you, the Mourning. We're going to use some kind of special magic thing that gets around this idea that suffering only builds on suffering, and we're going to negate you, or we're going to banish you to another dimension or something. And the PCs can do that because I would try to not keep them from doing it. I would try instead to believe that the process of the campaign along the way would at least raise the question to the players of whether this is a bad solution. Because I think we could have the ending of a Mournland campaign or a Mournguard campaign where the Mourning has been banished, but then the land that's left behind is just, it's not magically scary, but it is completely ravaged, and there is no coming back from it. The more happy ending, the potential happy ending of a Mournguard campaign would be if some sort of justice, restorative, reparative, transformative, whatever, is accomplished. If some of the warmongers are brought to heel, if people face consequences for what they've done, if war profiteers are laid low, that any number of those steps could heal parts of the Mourning. Because the idea, again, going back to the big scale, is there was a gigantic war, so big and so terrible, it left a several 100-mile long scar in the world. Much like in World War II, the use of nuclear weapons permanently changed the terrain and the reality of life for people in Japan. The same way that the firebombing of Dresden completely changed what it was and what it is to live in Dresden and be connected to the history of Dresden. And, insert examples from any other war, any other time in history. This is the literalization of the metaphor of the permanent scars that are left on the landscape and on the population and on history when people go to war at specific scales, when people use mass violence as a means of solving their problems. Even, I say, when it's like, okay, cool. If you've got a bunch of fascists and they've got a bunch of guns, it's very hard to keep the fascists from killing people by telling the fascists that they're bad people and that they should stop. That's not what I'm talking about here. Because the people who are at fault in this campaign that I would be directing the player characters toward are the ones who are culpable because they moved others to war en masse for selfish reasons. So if I decided that one of the nations was invaded in the war, if one of these nations is Ukraine and another one of these nations is Russia in the current Russian invasion of Ukraine, there may still be people in that country that is the analog to Ukraine who then are war profiteers. And those people would then be the ones who need to be brought to justice, not whatever leadership said, we're being invaded, let us mobilize our people to protect our home and so that they can protect their homes. I want to be really clear about that. Because if there's 5 nations left over, Sire is gone, part of this is also going to be like, what do you do with the leadership of Sire? To what degree are they culpable in this? Is some notable figure in the Sire leadership an individual voice within this gestalt of the Mourning? Does the Mourning at times assume the aspect of, a late king, queen, prince, princess, princept, or whatever of Sire? Does the fact that a lot of the souls that make up the Mourning are souls of the nation of Sire, how does that then impact how the Mourning thinks about things? So I'll try to read up on Sire, get a sense of what is described as some elements of national cultural importance in Sire, and how does that then inform the way that this gestalt thinks? Give some flavor there. Because then what I do is I take a setting that is in a Cold War and I make the leadership there grapple with the psychological and sociological impacts of this war that they just ended, but many of the people who signed that treaty would have been principals in waging the war previously. So responding to the Mourning by saying we need to stop this mass killing is a good first step, but it does not make restitution for what has come before. So that's my pitch to myself for the Mournguard as a campaign. It lets me get weird monsters right up front. It lets me do something that is still D&D but feels distinct. It's not going to be so much about doing kind of more conventional level 1 D&D stuff, because there's plenty of people that will do that. If you want conventional D&D things, goodness, there are so many campaigns that will do that for you. Some of which I've read, some of which I've seen people play. This is one of the ways, or this is an example of how I can come to 5e material and go, what in here is interesting to me? And I can look at the Mournland and I can look at the history of the last war and Eberron, and I can go, okay, as a speculative fiction writer, as a storyteller, bringing the skills and the background that I have to this medium, what do I have to bring to it? what is an idea that I can find or spark or adapt and grow into something worth sharing and developing with people. So Queen's Court Games, thank you very much. That's incredibly kind. I owe a lot of this to the fact that much of my storytelling training growing up was playing TTRPGs. My parents are performers who met performing in like theater and show choir. And so performance and the basically meaning, like communication of meaning has been fairly present throughout my life. And I've had a lot of advantages across a lot of axes with regards to education and access and mentors and things like that. But I would say, if you ever want a brainstorming buddy, drop me a line and I'll see if I can make that work. Because I love ideation. I love that, like, let's bounce ideas back and forth off of each other kind of thing. Especially with people who, like, if you come to me and say, like, I've got some things and I want to try to talk through them and figure stuff out, or like get past ideas, like that lets me bring my, like, a part of my creativity that I love flexing, and where I feel like I can give value to other people because I can't not have these ideas in terms of, like, oh, well, the Mourning is like, okay, there's an intelligence in the Mourning. Okay, what is that? And then going from that to, this is a way to tackle how I feel about the way that war leaves marks on society, and how the people that conduct war are almost never made to account for the terrible things that they've done. George W. Bush did not go to prison. Nobody who orchestrated the invasion of Iraq went to prison, to my knowledge. Like, maybe some folks like went to some hearings, but the farther up the org chart you go, seemingly the fewer consequences any of them faced. And I feel bad about that. It makes me feel a certain way with a rage. And I can't, it's very difficult for me to imagine that I could make something like that happen, that I could individually or even as a part of a group manifest a broad and deep enough political will to force someone from a political dynasty like the Bushes to face consequences in that big way. But what I can do is I can create stories. And maybe the best way, my best chance to make an impact on a broader level in terms of moving public opinion toward accountability and things like that, is to tell a story gesturing in that direction so well that it resonates with a large number of people. It concretizes or moves their minds or their hearts, so that then as a group, however many of us that make or connect with this work speak with that same voice toward a political end. So this has now become an even bigger manifesto of why I make art sometimes. Sometimes I make art to try to change the world, or big chunks of the world, or at least to do my best job of expressing the problems that I have with the world. Here is an itemized list of disagreements. Bang, 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 theses on the door. And yes, for those following, that was both a Hamilton and a religious history reference in 1.5 sentences, because that's how my brain works. Okay, so practically, the next thing to do with Mournguard is to make a write-up and put it on Start Playing Games, if I'm going to take it that direction. I could absolutely take Mournguard and then like run it as a 5e game on an actual play group. I feel like I could probably start doing that pretty soon, because I don't have to design the whole adventure book. All I would have to do is read up on the Eberron setting a bit more and do session 0 with the players, get them bought into, here's the overall premise of this campaign, whether that is reading them into some of the bigger thematic truths and relying on them to use to use their ability to storytell within dramatic irony as co-authors, knowing that like we're trying to get to an eventual end. So like there's a version that is actual play that is kind of pre-scripted, not in the individual lines way, but in here is our creative ambition. Here is where we are looking to end up as storytellers. So I could do that. I could run an on-start playing games. I could maybe do both. The reparations for Japanese Americans who were interned, and reparations for African Americans and people, all of the Black Americans who are descended from enslaved people. D. Yellowflower, if you have not seen the Watchmen TV show, I would definitely recommend it for a depiction of an alternate USA where reparations for African Americans did happen. And okay, great. I'm glad that you have. Very cool. Yeah, that was the alternate history world building of that season was fascinating to me, and I wish that they had gone way deeper with it. I understand that it was an important background element for telling the specific story that they wanted to tell, which was more personal. It was a story where, okay, well, here's this great racist atrocity waged on this settlement. Here's some alternate history stuff, and it's ultimately going to be about this family and this character's relationship to kind of the history of vigilantism and all this kind of stuff. One of the things that I would love to do is to see a Black-led actual play team do some kind of superhero story. Vietnam. I think Vietnam is a state by that time, but I do not recall for sure. I'd love to see, and if this has already happened, please let me know, a creative team, either in actual play or actual play is the thing I'm thinking about because we're here doing a design stream. Do a low-powered superhero game in that extended version of the Watchmen setting and tackle more broadly with the sociological implications. My current favorite superhero RPG is Masks: A New Generation, which I don't know to what degree is the best game to do that kind of broader of a thing. I don't know if you might want to use instead something like Aberrant or Exceptionals or some other game, or maybe even something that's a little bit more genre agnostic, but is oriented toward kind of the more broader sociological storytelling kind of a thing. That'd be very cool, but I'm not the ideal person to do that, except perhaps in a situation where I was able to be a catalyst or an enabler, like a creative enabler to a group of colleagues who had the positionality in the background to more effectively tell that story. Like one of the things that I give Damon Lindelof props for on Watchmen is he said, okay, this idea is really interesting to me, but it doesn't make sense for me to try to do this on my own. And so what it appears is that he was able to use the influence that he had to build a team largely of Black Americans to tell the story that it made more sense for Black Americans to tell, as opposed to him doing so as someone who is outside of the kind of lived experience of what it is to be a Black American. So sometimes privilege is used to good ends, and that's great. That's really what it should be for. Use it to good ends, and in doing so, dismantle the mechanisms that create these disparities. And then a better world. Okay. Meg got home a little bit ago. I have not taken a break through any of this, and I feel like I'm at a pretty good resting point / stopping point. I feel like I could start running Mournguard pretty quickly after doing doing some write-up stuff. The Blades of Sigil stuff, I think there's more learning about the setting because the Planescape material has stuff that I think I would make use of, versus Eberron, where I think I would be bringing more of my own version of Eberron to the setting and pulling, and I would be putting my own creative loci of gravity into Eberron and warp Eberron toward my purposes, perhaps more thoroughly or in a different way than I would be going into Sigil and manipulating that kind of stuff. So that's that. I'm glad that I was able to talk about both of those, because that's kind of they're very different ways that I've been thinking about and trying to find a way into talking about and getting myself into the place where I'd feel comfortable GMing D&D 5th edition using kind of existing settings. Because another option is to just bring a whole other setting into 5e, either create a setting or take some other setting that I already have created because I'm a novelist. I don't think it would work super well for me to bring most any of my settings into 5e. The one that is maybe the closest would be like the Epic Fantasy Land from Genrenauts, which that becomes less special when I bring it back into D&D because it's about being meta. And then the other one would be like Audek Hall from Shield and Crocus. And I think it makes more sense for me, if I was going to bring Audek Hall to TTRPG, would be to bring it to probably a Powered by the Apocalypse or Forged in the Dark, possibly a Sparked by Resistance game, because again, faction relationships are really important. It's a very mission-oriented game, and the scope and scale of the powers wielded by the shields feels like it would not be well represented by 5e mechanics. So that's that. I'm very glad, D. Yellowflower, that this has helped you, has brought motivation for working on your murder mystery setting. So I want to say thank you to D. Yellowflower, to Queen's Court Games, to Cafe Claire, to Triffity Mats, and to Destructor 92000, as well as everybody else who has come through to hang out while I do this this chat, this experimental. How do I make this work? How can I have fun while doing this thing that maybe makes sense as a way to add a revenue stream while publishing is a complete effing mess, as it has been in the last couple of years. So that's been fun. I will probably do more of these. I don't know exactly what shape they will Adventure 1. The PCs receives. I see. Thank you. Got it. Or no, thank you. So yeah, that's that. I'm going to pull up a Twitch page to see who all is streaming and to see if I should go and send a raid to somebody. All right. The only people who are around are people with much, much, much larger streams that I don't know personally. So I think we'll just call it there. Thank you again, everybody, for hanging out. And Messenger Bird. That's also correct. Thank you. I'm still working on the skill of typing well while saying the thing that I'm typing. And I got this split keyboard thing that's way better for me ergonomically, but I'm still getting used to it a bit. But yeah, so there's a couple settings that I'm working on. And if you have not been watching, I would say please go check out Valorword, a Court of Blades campaign that I am GMing, aka I'm serving as the dancing master, which is a term that the Drakes gave me that I love very much, having formerly been a person who is super into dance. But yeah, we had the first live play. We are using the Court of Blades mechanics session for Valorword this last week. It was great. You can find it on YouTube. I added a comment that basically tells you here is where you can jump to if you just want to see the scene play versus the back end of the session 0 group making bond determining stuff. So you can jump in and find that and enjoy it. And then I will probably be back this coming... I have people coming to visit this weekend, friends of... let's go over here so that I'm not doxing myself. Nope. Let's just close that. I was going to go to Patreon over there. Let's not. Instead, let's just get rid of that. Let's get rid of that. Thank you. I'm going to go over to Patreon and see what I wrote down as my schedule so that I can try to see if I can keep to that. I think I said that I was going to play Wintermoor on Sunday, which may or may not happen because I have Meg and I have people coming to visit, and they would still be here on Sunday. So yeah, I said that I was going to play Wintermoor on Sunday. That may not happen. I may move it to Friday or do something else on Friday. Stay tuned over on Twitter for more information about that. Okay, cool. Thanks again, everybody. See you around. And ending.